Welcome to the motherfucking relay where we're covering today's top boxing news.
Okay, we'll start with this. Well, some very disappointing news in the world of women's boxing today. What was very much still a prospect, an up-and-comer, a fighter crossing over into contender status, Firuza Sharipova of Kazakhstan has so decided to call it quits. In Firuza's own words, she brought up finance as being the motivating factor behind calling it a career that, in 2018, she was supposed to be squaring off against Eva Wallstrom and challenging her for that WBC title, but the fight never came off because the money wasn't there, the financial backing, it wasn't there. So the fight never materialized. And what Firuza is basically saying is that this has been an issue, more or less. Financial backing has been an issue for her for the last 2 years. And Firuza, in so many words, highlighted the time and the effort that it takes to stay match fit while waiting for the opportunities to roll around, but they never actually do because the financial backing just isn't there. That there have been a lot of promises, but those promises, for the most part, have been empty promises, so she's deciding to walk away. And I think it's a pity. I really do think it's disappointing because, one, this is a very talented fighter. You gotta realize that. This is a talented fighter with potential that perhaps could even transcend the sport because she's actually very easy on the eyes. She's a very marketable fighter. It just so happens that she's not just a pretty face. This girl can actually box. So to see her walk away from the sport before achieving that dream of becoming a full-fledged champion, it's rather disheartening. Especially now when women's boxing is in a much better place than it has been in previous years. There are several big outfits out there that have got several female fighters of their own fighting under their banners. I wonder that Firuza Sharipova can't get in contact with the Sarlin Promotions. Sarlin Promotions has several female fighters fighting under their banner. The same is true for MTK Global, Matchroom, Queensberry Promotions, hell, even Top Rank's got Michaela Mayer, okay? There are several big outfits out there that are invested in the sport of women's boxing, and I wonder that Firuza Sharipova shouldn't give it another go, but instead of limiting her potential to what Kazakhstan has got to offer, why doesn't she just broaden her horizons and get in contact with some of these other outfits? For her, she may have to go abroad to do it, but rest assured, they've got the money to make the fights. And because she's a marketable fighter, because she's easy on the eyes, there's a lot of potential there. This is a fighter that you can really sell. One, because she's easy on the eyes, let's not kid ourselves. And two, because this girl can really fight. She can really box. She's got what it takes to become a world champion. Firuza Sharipova has a pro record of 7 wins and 1 loss. And what that denotes is that she was very much a prospect that was crossing over into contender status. She was lining herself up for a world title and had decent odds of winning one. Because I reiterate, the girl can really box. She's actually pretty damn good. Fluid. Good balance of offense, defense, mobility, sharpness, variety of punches. So she's a good fighter. And she's got what it takes to make something of herself in the sport, provided she's in a nurturing environment. But if Kazakhstan domestically can't do it for her, I don't see why she doesn't just look abroad, expand her horizons. She can find the backing because she's marketable. It's not just that she's a good fighter. You can really sell this girl. Kazakhstan, as a country, they haven't provided that many familiar faces to the sport of boxing outside of Gennady Golovkin. They got a couple of guys on the come up here and there, though those guys, they're not well known yet. They're not household names yet, at least not like he is. But with Firuza, you don't just have a skilled fighter. You actually have a fighter that has universal appeal, that you can sell this girl, that she could easily become the second most recognizable fighter from that region of the world, provided that she's nurtured, provided that the right situations are orchestrated for her. So, I don't think that this should be the end of her. I think that before they really decide to hang the gloves up, before she does, maybe she should look into broadening her horizons and going elsewhere, where the opportunities for a female fighter may lie at this point in the juncture, because the sport of women's boxing is booming right now, more so than it has been in previous years, in previous eras. And just about every major outfit right now has several female fighters fighting under their banner. Firuza could be one of those fighters, representing Kazakhstan in all the ways that Gennady Golovkin represents Kazakhstan here in America. It'd be a pity if she doesn't try this. It'd be a pity if she doesn't give it one more go before deciding to call it a career. Very disappointing news. In other news, it appears that much like we thought he would, Callum Smith is going to be fighting John Ryder in defense of his WBA super middleweight title. Fight's going down on November 23rd in Callum Smith's native Liverpool. He hasn't actually fought there. He hasn't actually fought in his hometown since 2017. So this will be a return for him to his native Liverpool. I'm sure he will get a warm reception from the hometown crowd. And for Callum Smith,
it's necessary.
These fights across the Atlantic, in the UK, these fights, they're necessary because whether John Ryder is a heralded or unheralded opponent is besides the point. If you're going to build Callum Smith,
his profile,
and you want to build up his profile for what could be a domestic pay-per-view with Billy Joe Saunders, you've got to get him back over there. You've got to get him fighting over there. You've got to, let people see him in action in his native soil so that they can reacquaint themselves with that fighter.
And what he can do.
And I understand that this John Ryder fight, it may not be the most exciting opponent choice. It might not be the most interesting guy out there for Callum Smith to fight. But what you've got to remember is that, one, this is a mandated title defense. This ain't a hand-picked guy. This is a guy that he's got to fight or cough up his belt. Why would you want to cough up your belt to John Ryder when you could probably knock his ass out? So it's an evil, but it's a necessary evil. Two, it lends itself to furthering
his career development.
Callum's profile. Callum Smith, who I reiterate, he hasn't fought in his native Liverpool since 2017. This guy spent over a year now on the road. And if you really want to build this Saunders fight into a bona fide pay-per-view, you've got to get Callum Smith back over there. You've got to get the boxing community over there on that side of the world interested in this guy, in these guys, in these fighters. And one way to do it is to stage fights over there so that time zones and all that stuff, it's not even a factor. The fight's right there, accessible to those fight fans. Those same fight fans who you aspire to sell a Smith versus Saunders fight. Understand that while Callum Smith has a name, it's not a big name. Don't get it twisted. He ain't Anthony Joshua over there, anything like that. So this is a guy who needs to further build his profile. Add to it, the UK boxing fans, more and more they're becoming world-renowned for how much they support their fighters. But you've still got to give them something to support. You've got to captivate their hearts, captivate their minds. And, one way to do it is to actually fucking fight over there, So I think it's the right idea. And, he's got to go over there and he's got to do the job. But it's not just doing the job. He's got to beat John Ryder in good fashion. He may have to spark him out in all the same ways that he sparked out Endom, in all the same ways that he sparked out George Groves. You got to get people excited. And one thing that really gets people fucking excited, especially casual fans, are knockouts.
They love
If he can bounce John Ryder off the canvas the same way he just did Hassan Endom, I think the Liverpool crowd is going to like that. Don't go back home and fall asleep at the wheel, get lackadaisical. Because you see what happened to Jarrett Hurd when he had a hometown fight against Julian Williams. You see what just happened to Nicola Adams. Earlier today, she defended her title.
Split draw.
This was her first title defense as WBO champion, and she underperformed. She underwhelmed. Callum Smith can't afford to do that if he's trying to build his profile. He's got to make it to where people get excited when his name is brought up and one of his fights roll around. One way to get him excited is to knock John Ryder's fucking block off. Callum Smith, he really could use a profile boost because you'd never know that this guy is ranked as the #1 super middleweight in the world, ahead of all the other titleists and all the other contenders. Callum Smith is ranked as the #1 guy in the super middleweight division, but he doesn't have the profile of an Anthony Joshua, for example. Hell, he doesn't really have the profile of an Errol Spence here in America. I mean, his profile, it does need something. Those eggs need more bacon. And one way to add something to the plate is to go over there to Liverpool, knock this guy's block off, get yourself some fans, get everybody excited, show him what you can do. That's the way to go. So I understand that this fight may not be the most interesting fighter or the most interesting opponent choice. In a lot of ways, it seems like an evil, but it is a necessary evil, because need I remind you, this is his mandatory challenger. If he wants to keep that belt, he's got to deal with this guy. So let him go over there and deal with this guy, but do it in good fashion so that you leave a lasting impression on the boxing community, the hometown crowd. Now, in regards to Nicola Adams, the underwhelming performance she just put on,
looked flat.
Against Maria Salinas, who was challenging her for what is Nicola's WBO title.
Tough fight.
You know, Nicola, you expect better. I mean, you do expect better.
A double gold medalist.
You're talking about a double gold medalist. A fighter that comes from that pedigree, you don't actually expect them to go out there and struggle as much as Nicola did with Salinas, but that's very much what happened. And all we can do is try to understand why it happened. All we can do is try to wrap our minds around it. And almost immediately, I can see why Nicola struggled. I can see what led to that.
It's the perfect storm.
You know, had that been Nicola Adams in there with Arely Musinho, who was then the WBO champion, who held the same title that Nicola has now, had that been Nicola Adams in there with Arely Musinho, I hate to say it, but if that were her, if that were Arely in there tonight, Nicola would have lost that fight. Oh yeah. Nicola would have lost that fight because Musinho is a lot like Salinas, except she's a cut above Salinas. She actually beat Salinas not too long ago, 1 or 2 years ago. She beat Salinas, and they've got things in common. They're both aggressive, they're both physical, they're both pressure fighters who fight at a high pace. High-octane fighters, volume punchers. But Musinho is a cut above Salinas, hence Musinho beating Salinas at her own game. I mean, they're both pressure fighters. It's just that Arely is better at it. So, as you can imagine, had that been Arely in there tonight with Nicola Adams, oh yeah, there's a good chance she would have beat her. There's even a good chance that she would have stopped her based on the Nicola Adams that I saw tonight. You know, these two, they were actually supposed to fight. You may have forgotten that back when Nicola was the challenger and Musinho was the champion, yeah, they were supposed to fight, and Nicola got injured, the fight got scrapped. And you know what? Nicola Adams is very lucky that the fight got scrapped. Nicola Adams is very lucky that the fight didn't get postponed and rescheduled for a later date, because had Nicola Adams fought Musinho the way she fought Salinas tonight, yeah, she would have lost that fight. I have no doubts, based on what I saw. In many ways, this is the perfect storm. You have a fighter in Nicola Adams who comes from a fantastic amateur background, a double gold medalist, the kind of pedigree that not every professional has, right? But in the pro ranks, she's only actually got 5 fights.
That's it.
So she's very much transitioning from the amateur style to the pro style. And as it stands, you've only had 5 pro fights. There's that to consider, and then there is the long spell of inactivity to consider. That Nicola Adams hasn't had a fight since October of last year. That's almost 12 months. For a fighter who's still earning their stripes and making their bones as a professional, that duration of time, going that duration of time without having a fight, it's very counterproductive, and it makes for flat performances. Flat performances like the one we just saw from Nicola Adams. So if she went out there and struggled with Salinas...
That's why.
That's at least a part of it. The other part of it is, you know, you're transitioning from the amateur to the pro style. And these other fighters out there, like Salinas, they may not have all the technique and the finesse fighting that Adams has, but what they have that she may not have is experience, and they're gutting and gritty fighters. They're willing to take one to give one. They're willing to charge you and make it a physical fight, suck you into a war, make you uncomfortable. And that's very much what Salinas did to Adams here tonight. Adams, you know, she got off some shots here and there, but she was on the receiving end of some really hard shots from Salinas, okay? And while Nicola Adams might have taken the shots well, you wonder that she didn't dodge a bullet by maintaining her O. You wonder that she didn't dodge a bullet by the judges scoring it a split draw. There's an argument that, you know, Adams lost this fight. If someone saw this thing and told me that they scored it for Salinas, I could hardly blame them, because she was definitely pushing the pace. She was definitely a busy fighter, and Nicola Adams was in the fight. She was contending, but I reiterate, she looked flat. She couldn't really establish her jab, her movements, they were a bit uncoordinated, at times looking off balance, getting off combinations, and sometimes hitting nothing but air. I mean, it's not what you would expect from someone as decorated an amateur as Nicola Adams. And look, we're not assigning blame. We're not trying to be overly critical. We're just trying to wrap our minds around what we saw. And if Nicola Adams went out there and performed this way, it's one, because of the spell of inactivity due to injury. It's not necessarily her fault. She did have an injury that did keep her out for a while, but it's causality. When you don't have a lot of pro fights and you don't have a lot of pro experience to draw from, you get back in there with someone as aggressive and physical as a Salinas, yeah, you're going to struggle. You're going to struggle.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the time, when a fighter's in the early stages of their career and they only got like 5 pro fights, right? Usually, these kind of fighters, they're fighting upwards of 3, 4, maybe even 5 times a year to garner experience. Whereas for Nicola, she's been out of action for 10, 11 months.
Due to injury.
This is actually her first fight of 2019, and they put you in there with an aggressive, physical fighter who just so happens to be a southpaw. It's the perfect storm and the perfect environment for a fighter like Nicola, who has a great amateur background, but, an environment where she's going to struggle. At minimum, what you can say, the silver lining here is that even though Nicola didn't look good tonight,
She could learn from it.
this is a wake-up call for her, because these are the kind of girls that are going to be coming after her now that she's a champion. These are the kind of challengers that are going to be zeroing in on what she's got and trying to take it. And it's not just them. It's also the other belt holders. The other belt holders who may view Nicola and the backing that she's got, that she's with Queensberry Promotions,
Fights on BT.
they may start to look at Nicola as a bit of a money fight. So you got all these different forces descending down, bearing down on you, trying to take what you've got. And this close call tonight, the bullet that Nicola dodged, may so incline her
To step it up.
to focus the fuck up. Get on your P's and Q's. Because the circumstances of Nicola Adams even having that WBO title, it is pure happenstance. She didn't beat a champion to become a champion, thereby establishing herself as one of the elites at the weight. That's not how it happened. They gave her that WBO title without a contest. Sometime between October of last year and this year, and she hadn't fought anybody this entire year, yet they felt so inclined to give her the belt. Now she is confronted with the responsibilities of being a champion, and if there's a silver lining to this performance, if there's anything that can be drawn from it, is that this close call may leave her so inclined to get back in that gym, focus the fuck up, and tighten up and improve upon her game. Because if tonight showed anything, is that there's room for improvement. We then move on to Dubois versus Tetteh, the main fight on the card. A spectacular first-round knockout that reminds us why everyone's so excited about Daniel Dubois, who looks to be, he's got all the makings of the next big thing. Now, need I remind you that this is a guy who's very young. He's like, I don't know, 20 years old, only 7 amateur fights, but already he's exhibiting a very well-established and powerful left hand, and everything is off the left hand. Everything is off the jab. It just so happens that, one of the telltale signs of any really good boxer is a well-established jab, because that jab can very much control everything that happens in a fight, so long as the fighter doesn't abandon it. And Daniel Dubois, almost immediately in this fight, he established his jab and set up all the power shots that followed. But I'll say this much. Daniel Dubois is looking sensational fight by fight, but I still feel that given how young he is and the fact that he's not an Olympian, this is not a guy who comes from some extensive amateur background, I still feel that this is a guy who needs to be brought along slowly. Let him have more fights like this against these kinds of fighters. Don't rush him to the world level when you have the luxury of time. A fighter with as much upside as a Daniel Dubois doesn't need to be hurried into world title and contender situations. Let him keep fighting more Gormans and more Tettehs. Let him fully develop as a fighter. It's not that I'm not pleased with Daniel Dubois' performance, it's just that I don't have any illusions about Tetteh and what his levels are, what his experiences bring to the table. I think Daniel's coming along fantastic. He's looking sensational. He's winning the fights he's supposed to win. But don't be a slave to the moment and set him up to fail by rushing him into situations with fighters that he don't need to be fighting. Take your time with Daniel Dubois.
Don't rush him.